The topic today is economic disruption. I thought I'd start with what has become one of my favorite jokes, which is they say that the factory of the future will have two employees, a man and a dog. The job of the man is to feed the dog, and the job of the dog is to keep the man from touching the machinery. We will have a session just after lunch with Arun Myra on the future of employment and the future of jobs in the country. And when Arun talks about the future of jobs in the country, he will be talking about technical change and disruption. He will be talking about how the wealth creation might be in certain sectors of the economy, while the job creation might be in other sectors of the economy. And we need to then create this very vibrant ecosystem that manages this dual positioning, where you have wealth being created in one part and jobs being created in a different area. But I wanted to talk actually this morning, as Chandrajit mentioned and as Shobna also referred to in her comments, about technology, about investments in technology, and about why investments in technology by us in industry and in our institutions is absolutely vital to the future for us as a country. If you look at our industrial structure today is more skill intensive and capital intensive than most countries at comparable levels of development. So we have, for various historical reasons, arrived at a point in time where we have an industrial structure that is largely skill intensive and capital intensive. You see it around you when you drive through to HICC. You see evidence of that in abundance. That's all a statement of the skill intensive and capital intensive structure that characterizes our industry today. If we want a skill-intensive and capital-intensive structure to grow rapidly, you have to invest in technology. Other countries have been able to develop, a China in the 90s and 2000s, or a South Korea before that in the 60s and 70s, or a Japan in the 50s and 60s. They all experienced rapid industrial development and growth without significant investments in technology. But that's because they started with industrial structures that were much more labor intensive, that were much less capital and skill intensive. If we have the kind of structure that we have of skill intensive and capital intensive industry, the only way forward is greater investments in technology. What do I mean by greater investments in technology? Two things. First, in-house R&D in industry. In-house R&D in industry, in total investments by Indian industry in-house R&D is about 0.3% of GDP. The world average is 1.5%. The Chinese average is also 1.5%. So to simply match the world average, not match the world's leading countries in terms of industrial investment in R&D, we need to grow our R&D investments in our firms by a factor of 5. And I'll come back to this in a minute. Second, if you look at investments in public research within the higher education space, within the higher education sector, we are at about 0.04% of GDP of public research done in our higher education institutions. The global average is 0.4%. So to match again the global average, we need to grow investments in research in our higher education space by a factor of 10. Right? How are we going to bring about these kinds of order of magnitude increases? A factor of 5 increase in investment in R&D by firms and a factor of 10 increase in research done in our higher education sector. It's simpler to do this in the higher education sector. How? Well, we actually do invest as a state, as a country. We invest. Public research funding is actually quite abundant. The problem is where it's done. It tends to be located in autonomous R&D laboratories, state R&D laboratories, several of which, by the way, are in Hyderabad. but they're spread out all around the country. And these laboratories have constantly struggled with connecting with the productive sector. All around the world, the state tends to fund public research in higher education institutions for some very good reasons. Because you have graduates coming out of those colleges who go and work for industry, and you have an immediate connection that is formed. So you create human capital, you create capabilities, technical capabilities, embodied in the heads and hands of the people who graduate from institutions, who then go off and work for companies and take that knowledge and capability with them. But when you fund most of your public research in autonomous labs, you do not get that major single leading benefit of why one does public research in the first place. So we have this huge opportunity to, over time, shift our total public research funding from these autonomous labs into the higher education sector. It's a huge opportunity that we have as a country, and it's one that we need to start engaging with and take forward. Coming to firms, because almost everyone here is connected with a firm. I mentioned that we need to scale our R&D investments in-house by a factor of 5. And this applies across sectors. Let's take the most R&D intensive sector that we have in the country, which is pharmaceuticals. We invest about 8% of turnover in R&D in the pharmaceutical sector. It's the most R&D intensive sector in the country. The global average is about 15%. So even in our most R&D intensive sector, we're about half as R&D intensive as the global average. Take engineering and the auto sector. We invest around 2% of turnover in R&D in the country. The global average is 6%. So if you take the second big sector worldwide, that is R&D intensive, we need to increase our investments by a factor of 3. Take software, which is justifiably a sector that we can be hugely proud of. We invest around 1% of turnover in R&D. The global average is 15%, but leave that apart because a lot of that is product firms. If you take the Chinese average, the top 10 firms in India, software firms in India, the top 10 software firms in China have about the same turnover. Indian firms are about twice as profitable on average as the top 10 Chinese firms. But if you look at investments in R&D, total investments in R&D by our top 10 software firms is around 1% of turnover in R&D. Top 10 Chinese firms around 8% in R&D. And they're all software services firms. Out of the top 10, 8 are software services firms.